All right. There we go. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. I will say again to the Main Street, Rhode Island Roundtable for June 26th, 2025. Our topic is resilient Main Streets. I am going to go ahead and share my screen to have our little go do our of course can't see it. All right. There we go. All right. So we are joined today by Katie Trautz, the Executive Director of Montpelier Live. We're talking about climate resilience and how Main Street programs contribute to the social infrastructure that is needed for part of the package of a climate resilience strategy. So I'll take 1 second to thank our sponsors today. Our program is being sponsored in part by Rhode Island Commerce and also Rhode Island Energy, who is a sponsor of our entire Main Street Rhode Island program. And I will just pause 1 second to also acknowledge our state legislature, which allocated us a little bit more funding for next year to expand upon the work that we're doing and bring some more Main Street programming and services to our Rhode Island walkable commercial districts, which we're very
Hi,
excited
Katie.
about.
Is
So,
Matthew available? It's Eric Norbert calling back.
oh, Eric, are you?
I think he joined unmuted. I just muted him.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll move on. Okay. Well, it's good news. We're very excited about this excellent news. It's a big step forward for us. And so I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that. For anyone that is new and is maybe wondering a little bit what we mean when we say Main Street, Rhode Island is plugging in with the National Network of Main Street America, which has been around since 1980 and really been the leaders in this 4 points Main Street approach to commercial district revitalization, looking at all the aspects of place that make a commercial district successful. They're here. The economic vitality refers to the businesses, design to the built environment, promotion to communication and events, and organization to how the people are organized to get the work accomplished. So Grossmont, Rhode Island is serving as the coordinating entity for the state of Rhode Island, serving all of you who are doing the work at the local level, bringing us all together, learning about best practices like the one we're going to talk about today with our guest presenter, Katie Trautz. So as I mentioned, she's the executive director of Montpelier Alive, which is a downtown organization in Montpelier, Vermont. She is born and raised in Vermont. She's a mother, a community leader, an arts advocate, was a co-founder of the nonprofit folk music school, Summit School of Traditional Music and Culture. Later, became the executive director of the Chandler Center for the Arts in Randolph, Vermont, then joined the Montpelier Alive organization, first as the event and communications coordinator, and then became the executive director. And within a month in that role, Montpelier experienced the summer 2023 flooding that I know we all were following very closely about it with really serious flooding and she was part of the effort, leading the effort to respond to the floods and help the downtown recover with managing 4,000 volunteers and helping people apply for funding and then also helping to distribute $2 million to small businesses. Her work has been recognized with a downtown leadership award from the state of Vermont, and also she was named the Vermont Woman of the Year by USA Today. So we are so lucky to have her with us to tell her story and talk to us about social infrastructure for climate resilience in Main Street. So welcome, Katie. Thank you so much for being with us. I will turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for the great introduction, Jillian. I'm honored to be here with all of you. It's always a little bit hard and emotional to tell our story and relive all the all the moments. But it's really important to share these stories and to know that this is happening, flooding and disasters, natural disasters all across the nation. And what happened in North Carolina last year was just devastating. My heart goes out to all the communities that have gone through these types of events. And it's really important to recognize the Main Street role in it all, and the community's role in all of this. That's what's going to pull our towns through in the end is community effort and partnerships. So um, I'll just begin kind of where Jillian left off. Um, I did enter this position uh, just before flood of July 2023. I actually became the director in February, so I had more than a month under my belt, but just a few months. And I took the job because I was very excited about doing like vibrancy work in the downtown. My background is in the arts and it's in events and festival planning, and that was what I was most excited about. The business support aspect was, I would say, something I knew less about. And I knew a lot of the business owners. I was an active community member and have lived in the area for nearly my whole life. But that was an area that I saw myself growing into in this job. Um, so I was able to do a few projects before the flood, but not many. I was really just dipping my toes in the work of becoming a director for this ministry organization. Montpelier Live has been around since 1999, so it has to its advantage a long history in our community, and the people who work with Montpelier Live are very well connected. And Montpelier Live has done some wonderful work. So I think that really positioned us well to take leadership when we were called into action. Um, so I'll walk you through kind of what happened and how we moved into that leadership role. I'm going to share my screen with some photos. Let's see here. Not exactly sure. Is that working here? I will make it bigger. Nope, that's not it. Where'd it go? Apologies. It slipped away. Give me one more moment.
No problem.
There we go. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. I've done this presentation a couple of times, but new things arise every time, new little tidbits and anecdotes throughout. So it's somewhat of an organic kind of storytelling that I'll walk you through. July 10th, there was very high precipitation in Montpelier, and I had no idea what was coming or that I would play a role in all of it. What I was most concerned about was my house, which was on the North Branch River in Montpelier. We had just bought this house 2 years prior. And we had interacted with the river in a really beautiful way. We did a lot of ice skating in the winter up and down the river. It was a community gathering spot. It was really lovely hearing the birds in the summer on the river. We really loved where we lived. And Montpelier is situated on the confluence of two rivers, but all in all, a couple more tributaries included. So really four pathways of water coming down into this valley. And the North Branch, where our house is located, was one of those rivers. And around 5 a.m. in the morning, we got a message from the city, my family did, saying that all the houses on the North Branch River were in peril because it was possible that the dam above us might might fail, and that would actually, the message said the city wasn't even sure what that would mean. This has never happened before. It was very vague, which that's something that we've worked on with the city public messaging. But it said that we had nowhere to evacuate to, and we should go to the second floor of our houses. And I started thinking that's probably a pretty bad idea with two small children and my husband to stay in our small one bedroom upstairs for the next 24 hours or however long it took for the waters to recede. Now, we didn't have flooding at our house or in our on the street where we lived just yet. The water was creeping up higher, but we made the personal decision to head across the road into the park, the city park, where there was higher ground. And we took a vehicle and some belongings with us. And we went to our friend's house, and it happened to be the city parks director, who is a good friend of mine, whose house was on top of a hill in the park. And we found our way there. A number of other people decided to go to the park instead of stay in their homes at that time. And we descended upon his home where he had kids too, and our kids could play. We thought that would be a really great situation. And at that same time, the city manager had talked to me that morning to say that Montpelier Alive has a history with volunteers and a trust with the businesses. Would we please be responsible for coordinating volunteers to help with the cleanup from any flooding? Now, nobody had seen the flooding that was happening in the downtown just yet. And so we had no idea the challenge we were about to face, but I stepped into that request and I said, okay. Shortly thereafter, he also called the city parks director, who I happened to be with at that moment, at his home, and the city manager asked if he would help because he realized at this point, maybe early morning on July 11th, that our town was completely underwater and that Katie would need some help. So the city parks director and I put our heads together along with a community member who called in to say that they had a background in disaster recovery and had a lot of experience in this area and would really like to help us. So we got on a call together and made a plan to find high ground in the downtown area and start a volunteer hub where people could check in and check out. We immediately put the request for volunteers, again, without even seeing what the downtown looked like. We put that request out there on our social media channels. Montpelier Live has a really good following on social media. We naturally do a lot of public messaging through our community newsletters. I was able to put some messages out there to request volunteers. And on our webpage, we had a sign up location, and we gave our community member volunteer an email address to be able to be checking for the volunteer participants who are writing in. So then we went downtown and we saw that there was at least 4 feet of water in the first level of many of these buildings. So you can see here the picture of our fire department. Now, fire department is supposed to be saving people from their homes. So I am sure that they were shocked as the water continued to rise and they had to vacate their location. The city did have an emergency location they were able to go to, but it was far from downtown. So that's always something, with the city that should be thought about ahead of time is, where do you dispatch from when you're getting flooded or you're in the middle of the disaster, which also relates to if your home is going to be underwater, make sure that you are able to relocate your, if your professional world depends on you being there, that you are able to relocate yourself and work remotely. Um, and also focus on the professional world alongside the personal world. I mean, I was thinking about my house this entire time. Just another little note. Compartmentalizing is really important to be able to show up. These are a couple more pictures of our downtown. You can see down here the bridge. We have many bridges. We have 23 bridges in Montpelier and 13 bridges in our downtown. This is what one of them looked like, but most of them were underwater. This is a more expansive view. People were taking drone footage, and actually Montpelier Alive was asking permission and then reposting them because we felt like it was really important for people outside our community to understand the impact of what was happening. This gave a really good visual of that. This is our main street. You can see the Capitol, the Golden Dome there. The Capitol building was just slightly elevated, but many of the state buildings were completely flooded as well. And the city buildings and City Hall, where our offices are. This is City Hall with the clock tower here. That's where I work out of. So we started this volunteer hub when we found higher ground. I'll show some images of that. And the way it works, we didn't really have a map to follow, but with putting our heads together, the city parks director, me, and our loyal community member, we decided we needed that physical location for check-in and telling volunteers where they should go and organizing them. But we also knew that people would start donating supplies, and we needed a place, a safe place, a dry place for those supplies to be. Our food pantry downtown was also flooded. And so we were able to house a pop-up food pantry. We were getting donations of dehumidifiers, sump pumps, any kind of supply, cleanup supply you could think of, along with a lot of personal care items, clothing, couches. I think that the community, the region, and eventually the nation rallied, knowing that this impact was so large and so expansive that it wasn't just our commercial downtown. It was hundreds of community members who had lost. So we took in all of those donations at the hub, we checked people in and out. Fortunately, the city parks had a volunteer youth conservation corps working that summer. It just so happened that there were, I think, about 15 of them, high schoolers, who became immediately available to help with the very difficult chore of digging mud out of spaces. We jumped into action, and one lesson we learned, maybe we jumped a tiny bit too quickly. We didn't have proper PPE, which is, attire and face protection and the things that would protect us from what happens to be very toxic water. Fortunately, we didn't have much illness or disaster based off of that, but it's just a recommendation that I always make in this presentation, because had we known, we would have made sure our youth was safe in digging people out. Very shortly thereafter, the local hospital did step up and joined us at the hub and had a station where they could offer proper PPE for all the volunteers who needed it or wanted it. With that private-public partnership, which that's a term that will come up a lot in resilience planning and disaster preparedness, these partnerships are truly essential to make any headway in situations like this. The city and Montpelier Live naturally work together, but this brought us much, much closer, calling upon all of our collective resources. We couldn't have done it without each other, standing next to each other. The volunteer hub also became a place where we could offer free food to volunteers, and incredibly, we had vendors coming from all across the state who are willing to offer the free food. We had community members making free food. This was also something that was essential to the hub. Volunteers working all day, physical labor. They needed sustenance, and it was also a thank you and an offering. These are a few images of when we were able to empty all the contents from all the buildings in our downtown, what it looked like. This is our local movie theater, and here is our local bakery. I mean, 5 to 8 feet high of piles of trash that had to come out. Everything had to come out of these buildings. As I mentioned, the water that is flowing through is toxic. If you can imagine where it's coming from and flowing down through, and how many propane tanks were traveling through that water. In fact, the first time I came downtown that morning of July 11th, that was the strong smell that was everywhere, was the smell of gas or propane, which was very eerie. And you didn't know what would happen, if the propane's leaking everywhere, what does that mean? This is our MYCC, that's the Montpelier Youth Conservation Corps group, plus the city parks that worked together here. And see here, move my Zoom screen is in the way. We have the 3 partners, me, Alec, and Peter, who started the hub together. And then this is our area where we would check people in and out. It was really important to have a staff or community member who is patient, who is positive, and very, very organized at that table. Marek, who was sitting at that table, was there every single day for months. This volunteer hub was open for almost 3 months following the flood. This is an image of a local restaurant. Now, immediately Montpelier Live stepped into the role of supporting businesses because that is one of our other strengths. Of course, I mentioned that it may not have been my strength until this very moment. One of the main things in supporting businesses is building trust. And that is one thing that I had with business owners. I knew many of these business owners prior. I was an active community member, as I mentioned. And I had started off really trying to cultivate those relationships when I took the job starting in February. And that benefited me and them greatly during this challenge. This is a restaurant owner, Positive Pie, very popular downtown pizzeria. And we don't know, we can't predict what will happen when moisture and water infiltrate our building. For instance, in the basement is where he kept all his dough. And here you can see the dough exploded everywhere. And if you can imagine that kind of a mess to clean up, that is something that business owners need to be thinking about. What are they storing in their basements? And should they be storing anything in their basements? But especially dough is probably a bad idea. And this is the inside of his restaurant here on the first floor. I mean, it was just a disaster. What amazes me, though, is the business owners, all of their strength and willingness to tackle these projects. You can see here, Carlo is smiling. Why is he smiling? I mean, this whole situation is so so unique, so unexpected. And what it did is really draw people together. And if you didn't have the hope and a smile now and then, it would be very hard to get through. I mean, you really need to um, keep a sense of positivity and hope for the future, and Carlo did. Um, so Montpelier Live stepped up to support the businesses in many ways. The first way was checking in with each of them. And what I did right away was start bringing them together because they all had their own stories to share and they all could learn so much from each other. So we started weekly meetings with all the business owners. We normally have a monthly Montpelier Business Association meeting. We changed to weekly to make sure that these business owners had the information they needed, the most current information they needed. And after the first one or two, which were very cathartic meetings, very emotional, allowing the businesses to talk to each other and tell their stories and raise questions and concerns about their future in Montpelier, I started inviting professionals in to answer questions. There's no way that as a director of this organization and somebody so fresh in the build in the job, I would be able to answer all their questions. And so many of them were specific to what do I do next? And I had no map going into this. I didn't know what the next steps were. So we were all learning together. I was able, because as director of an organization like this, you quickly form connections and partnerships and contacts. I was able to very quickly reach out and find the resources that would be beneficial to have in the meeting, the people talking about things like insurance, talking about flood insurance, talking about funding, talking about toxic water, what needs to be cleaned and what needs to be thrown out. And I even started bringing in representatives into the room to hear the stories of the businesses. And as the legislature was making decisions about spending and recovery, flood recovery funding, they had to hear these stories firsthand. So we had both our state representatives and also our congressional delegates at some of these meetings, which I think was very also appreciated by the businesses to have a direct line of contact there. Also, very quickly after the flooding, I found that people were throwing donation checks at Montpelier Alive. And that was because, one, we had stepped into a leadership role. There wasn't much clear leadership beyond the volunteer hub. And so we were by default a place where they felt like they could give their funding and be decided how it would be used in the best way. But number two, we're a nonprofit and we have a platform for taking in donations. And I was able to pop up a donation link specific, a campaign specific to flood recovery right away on our website. And I was able to take in those checks. The only problem is I had lost my office in the flood. So I'm running around town with a deposit bag and not much else. So I quickly also turned to the community for help, and I was able to hire somebody to help with some of this development work and fundraising. It was a friend who had a little bit of a development background, and she worked along my side the entire time, entering these donations into a database, keeping track of everybody and their contributions, and sending acknowledgments. This is all important to consider and not to lose track of in those moments. We also heard from a local foundation, Montpelier Foundation, who we had worked with previously, and who had supported our work previously. And they felt strongly that if we partnered, we'd probably be able to double our impact with fundraising. And I also started realizing after a few weeks that these businesses would need so much funding to be able to pull through this and get back on their feet. And in fact, that is probably the most important resource for a commercial district, is emergency funding. There's a huge gap between when they can start receiving disaster unemployment, when they can start receiving their flood insurance checks months, 6 months later. And the state functions at a different pace than a nimble nonprofit. The city functions at a different pace than a nimble nonprofit. So having emergency funding that can easily be turned around is a really important piece of the picture as well. So we're all realizing these things as we think on our toes, but some things are just really clear, and that was one of them. We were able to raise $2.6 million, only 2 to 3 months time. And we distributed that in waves. Our first grant round was only a couple weeks after the flood. We made a lot of mistakes. So we made it very accessible and very easy to access that money. We had a grant committee that formed between Montpelier Live and the Montpelier Foundation. We acted very quickly. We had some scammers. We had some fraud. We reached out to other national organizations and partners to try to navigate some of that. But the main point that they would get across to us is it's more important that you give people the funding they need than to get caught up in all of the processes at this point in time. So we did our very best. We were able to identify some of the fraud and the scammers. I could go into that in more detail if people want to talk about that at the end of this presentation. But all in all, we did 3 grant rounds, and each one got better. Each one got tighter. Our application process became modeled after the state's applications when they popped their funding up. We also timed it so that it came between other funding opportunities. There was a lot of strategy and that evolved over time to be able to distribute the 2.6 million. I think our last grant round was in January. It might have even been a 4th grant round to get all that money to the people who still needed it and who are still recovering. The economic recovery from this situation continues on, and that's why continued funding and support for businesses is so important. But it's really that immediate funding that decides whether these businesses will be able to even try to bounce back. We had 90% of businesses reopen in our downtown. I think we lost about 10. And some of them were on the edge anyway. But I think that's a really amazing rate. And it also shows the commitment of our business owners to our downtown because of all the history and all the good work and how the town had evolved and grown into what it was before the flood, that there was a hope that we could return to that. There was a time, many weeks, where every building in the downtown looked like this. Every building had to be renovated. It looked like our entire downtown was being renovated all at one time. I'm showing Positive Pie again as an example because I wanted to mention how some businesses have taken measures to make their spaces more resilient. And I see them as models. But it takes investment and it takes funding. And Positive Pie poured a lot of heart and soul and funding into creating their space so that at this point they don't have drywall here. They have levers they can pull and manipulate equipment to pull it off the ground and up to the ceiling. They took other measures to make their building safe, moving electrical 4 feet high on the first floor. The city has some requirements now about the electrical and about furnaces. And then Montpelier Alive reiterates that people shouldn't store things in their basements. There are now more guidelines than there ever were before for businesses in the downtown, and we continue to build those for resilience. After about a month, um, we found that the community as a whole, not just the business community, had so many questions about the future of this place that had flooded numerous times in the past 100 years. And in my lifetime, at least 4 or 5 times. In the middle of winter, in fact, ice jams. We weren't strangers to ice jams. Uh, we had never flooded this badly, but I think we've seen how the precipitation and flooding has certainly gotten worse over the years. And now we're seeing it all around us, not just Montpelier. The flash flooding last summer in a neighboring community wiped out the entire village, much like many places in North Carolina. Um, so hearing the community's concerns and hearing the community's desire to rebuild back better, I helped, along with the Montpelier Foundation and the City of Montpelier, to host a series of public forums. And we had incredible turnout to these forums. I mean, again, showing the community care for Montpelier, showing the dedication to this town. People want to live here, they want to stay, and they all want to participate in reimagining that future. After 3 public forums, we decided that we needed to develop a group that would continue this work going forward. And that group came out of the community asking for leadership, and a number of partners within the community of other organizations like Vermont River Conservancy, the Friends of the Winooski River, who really felt up to the task to participate in a long-term vision, long-term planning, resilience planning for our watershed and for our community, for our downtown, ultimately. And that became the Montpelier Commission for Recovery and Resilience, a group of people who applied and were vetted to be a part of this working group. That group met, I believe, weekly or bi-weekly for a long time, and now continues to meet monthly. 2 years after, 3 years, 2 years, 2 years after the flooding. And we were able to raise money and hire an executive director. And that director has been working with partners along the watershed, because we know that projects up and down the river will affect the flooding in the downtown, to do some big picture and big project planning. Some of that include home buyouts and facilitating floodplain restoration. Some of those projects include building assessments in the downtown to identify how buildings can become more resilient, and getting property owners on board, and hopefully working with the state to find incentives for property owners to continue making their buildings more resilient. And then working with organizations like Montpelier Alive to better support businesses. We recently hosted an emergency planning workshop for businesses that walked businesses through a template that we had created that can act as a map or a way forward when flooding is happening in the moment. And by walking through those steps in blue skies and practicing what is written down on the template for their plan, they will be so much better prepared for the next time, because we know that there will be a next time. This is the inside of Positive High now. You can see they rebuilt with brick. Like I said, they've got these beams where they can hoist tables and equipment up high. And they also did some other renovations in their back space so that they didn't have to use their basement anymore. After we reopened, there was a time where we felt like the image of Montpelier had been painted. And I am sure that Asheville, North Carolina, and other places in the South and other places that have been hit by disaster um, go through the same thing. It's kind of interesting how, though we didn't know this beforehand, there truly is a pattern, a pretty reliable pattern to the process of the recovery. Um, so when we opened, we did a lot of marketing campaigns for Montpelier, and Montpelier Alive is seen kind of as the marketing branch for the city. We do all of the marketing for Montpelier. The capital, the state capitals in our downtown, there's marketing there as well. But together, we really amplify the message that Montpelier is a wonderful place to visit and for tourists. So we poured money into marketing campaigns. We also, with all the vacant storefronts that we were seeing, though we had 90% open rate, we still had vacant storefronts and also stores that hadn't opened yet that were still being renovated. We decided to do an art and empty storefront window project, and we got funding pretty quickly to be able to do that and make Montpelier look vibrant again. We continued to hold festivals and events. That was very important. And many of the businesses put together some pretty wild storefront displays to kind of speak to their story, but also to draw people in. We had community coming together to sing, to provide reflective moments, and offer opportunities to come together again and tell our stories. There was a very long processing that our community did together. This is one of the pieces that was in a storefront window by a local artist that again speaks to our recovery and our will to keep moving on together. We also engaged youth in this way. It's really great to provide opportunities for those who couldn't go into basements and shovel mud and pull trash out of buildings. And this is a way for the youth to get involved and be volunteers and be participants and also process their own stories. Again, many houses, many apartment buildings, many spaces were lost in the flood. So there were so many people impacted. We had youth creating art for these empty storefronts as well. As I said, the Montpelier Commission for Recovery and Resilience continues on. We're still working on big projects. It takes time. We know that the flood restoration project or the floodplain restoration project in our community will take 10 years, will take a decade or more to really show any impact in our downtown. But we know that it's all worthwhile. And if we want to continue living here amongst the rivers and keep our downtown vibrant and alive and well, we need to continue working on these things. Nobody has lost hope. Our latest project, which is related to hope and resilience, as well as a number of other themes and challenges in our downtown, has been Montpelier Alive Bridge Illumination Project to draw attention to the river, to rebuild a relationship with the river, and to put Montpelier on the map as a destination again. We envisioned a project where we would illuminate all the bridges with decorative, artistic lighting design, permanent lighting design that could evolve and change in terms of color and emphasis on the architecture of the bridges. There are many ways that they can be engaged, turned on and off. And this has become, hopefully, an economic driver for our community and a way for our community to continue facing the river and build relationship with our natural environment. We have been doing walking tours of the illuminated bridges. We have been engaging with the River Conservancy again and the Winooski Friends of the Winooski River to do talks about the progress that we're making with those watershed projects. Um, this bridge project has become kind of a central focus in our resilience and our vibrancy of our downtown. So there are both sides. There's the logistics and the actual work to lower the impact of flooding, but there's also the long-term kind of envisioning Montpelier as a vibrant place and marketing Montpelier as a vibrant place that is important to our economic recovery and resilience planning. So those are the things that we're working on now. That's our story in a nutshell. Um, and I'm happy to now turn over to Jillian to facilitate any discussion or conversation around all of this.
Wow, Katie, thank you so much. What an important and just moving story. And I'm so grateful to you for being here today and sharing that. I recognize what you said about it, the emotions about having to relive it, and it just makes it all the more special that you're helping helping others to be thinking about this. Um, in Rhode Island, we have a lot of water, also, and lots of people around the state thinking about this. I'll recognize that Silvana Mercado from our Commerce Department is here. She's helping run a special project, Ready, Set, Roadie, which is working with some of our most vulnerable Main Street districts on the infrastructure piece of it. But we don't have a history of Main Street programs here yet, in an official capacity. We certainly have groups of people that are working within commercial districts, but not in the um, the official capacity like Montpelier Live. So I wonder if you could just take a moment to kind of just touch on the role of us, like a municipality versus a state versus the special piece that an organization like Montpelier Alive contributes to um, specifically the thinking about climate response and and how obviously it existed before, but as you talk about your value to the community now, you know, like how you help make the case that this type of organization is so vital at this time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I remember at one point shortly after the flood when we were very active in that volunteer network and connecting with businesses, connecting volunteers with businesses, and the fundraising that I thought it suddenly occurred to me. Suddenly, I felt enlightened. This is why nonprofits exist because we can step up, we can jump into action at a pace that no other entity could really uh, perform or deliver at that time. And as I said, as a community organization, as an organization that is very well networked and has spent intentional time for decades, in our case, building relationships, and especially with business owners and especially with the community members that we're working with to make Montpelier vibrant. I think nonprofits generally put a lot of emphasis on their community work and their community network. Um, so again, it positioned us well to take leadership and being as nimble as a nonprofit can be, we were able up and take leadership.
Great. I want to go to some of the questions that have been posted in the chat. I know someone was saying Knowing that FEMA was slow to become involved in this incident and likely to be less available in the future, what would be your top three recommendations to other communities to become more resilient and self-reliant?
Um, well, uh, one recommendation is to work on those partnerships. Work on partnerships and knowing who is in your midst, who could be there with you and for you. I always say I really leaned on the pillars of strength during that time in my community. I identified them and I really leaned on them. We needed each other. So, as an organization, knowing who your partners are is one of the top priorities. Um, and in terms of our organization and resilience. Um, Also knowing the funding resources that you might be able to access. I mean, I'm speaking kind of specifically to the scenario and situation that we were in, but I think it's always good to know what the funding resources are because, as I mentioned, nothing could have really happened in terms of rebuild, in terms of um, rebuilding better um, if we didn't know how to fund it, whether that's trickling down to businesses in our case, or your own organization, or to deliver to any other community entity that, like a chamber, that could deliver out grants. I think funding resources is an important piece of the planning. And kind of back to the first one with partnerships, another thing that I think is very important in resilience planning is the volunteer component. So community relationships. We actually are starting something called a neighborhood network, where it's a somewhat structured way to connect neighbors to neighbors and identifying captains in neighborhoods who can help bring their own neighborhood together and continue the community building on a year-round constant basis so that you know your community will be there in the time of need and that your neighbor will be there when you need them. Speaking personally, but then on the bigger level, that community network is really what will pull a community through challenging times.
I love that for so many reasons. Um, I mean, talking about other things outside of climate change that can be accomplished through a neighborhood network like that. I mean, it's really um, that sounds. I would want to know more about that. But
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to for any event, any disaster, any it can be climate related or not, but it's the community that will pull through in the end, pull each other through in the end.
yeah, for those of you who may be new to our meetings, I've mentioned this book before, but it really changed my life in thinking so much, and that is Palaces for the People by Eric Klinenberg, um, talking about this concept of social infrastructure. And his work is often cited now, where he looked at the heat waves in Chicago in the 90s and how different communities fared and even compared communities with similar demographics and incomes where um, literally neighborhoods across the street from one another that were almost identical in, in every measure. One side had, so many more deaths than the other side, and look at the connection of the social connection of the community and how much better those individuals fared through the heat wave compared to the neighbors that were not socially connected, and then what element, like what caused the one side to be more connected than the other. I highly recommend this book, and I'll put the link in the chat. But In our last 5 minutes, how about you unshare your screen so we can see everyone? And then anyone else who has question, go ahead and like raise your hand so I um, can catch you on here. I think there was one other in the chat that kind of up where social media apps like Nextdoor helpful for building your community network and volunteer hub is one question.
We have something called Front Porch Forum in Vermont. And that certainly has become the go-to place for people to get very current in the moment news. The city will post there, Montpelier Live will post there, but neighbors will post there constantly. I think those digital and online networks are very useful.
Let's see. Thanks for sharing the great community leadership. Sorry, oh no, that's not the question. Okay. I know someone was asking about sharing some of the guidelines. Are they posted online somewhere, or are they something that are public?
The guidelines for businesses and emergency planning,
Yes.
rebuilding. Yeah, we feel like this is something that certainly needs more attention, and we're just starting to put pieces together. But we did work with the city to develop a city-wide, community-wide emergency plan called MAPLE, Montpelier. Oh geez, I forget what it stands for now, but it's basically a very big community emergency plan that identifies key partners like Montpelier Alive and identifies certain things that will happen in the case of emergency, like the hub, and when will the volunteer hub be engaged. And it's a very long and in-depth document that was approved by City Council and publicized and acts as an emergency plan, a map that we can follow, but continue to change and grow and make better and refine. Every year it can be readopted if revisions are to be made. So that's one version of an emergency plan that is public. We also have our business emergency plans, templates, things like that housed in a public space where the businesses can access them and download them. We have a website and a business support page. In terms of guidelines, like do this first, like contact your insurance company, then do this. This is how you wash buildings. This is how you all those detailed steps, especially when it comes to buildings and rebuilding them. There are a million resources out there. I mean, I'm very glad to find what I've seen out there, but it's a matter of organizing it in an accessible way for our specific community, for our property owners, in tandem with the city and the state, verifying that this information works and is correct for our buildings. That's a work in progress. We have found conflicting information online about how to deal with toxic water in buildings. We've found such in-depth information that it feels like it's overwhelming and too much. So it is something that we've been talking a lot about, especially with our planning department at the city. How do we make more resources available in an accessible way? And accessible meaning like easy to read, easy to navigate, but then also in a public space. I think that's really one of our next steps. And it's a great question. I mean, these resources do exist. They're all over the place. I know that just for example, the Small Business Development Center in our area has a 75-page workbook that is online and available. But for our business owners, it's too much. They're not going to turn to that when they're in crisis. So one of our Montpelier Alive goals was to develop something that is much shorter, much quicker to access, and an easy checklist that they can work down through, but then they always have this other resource and we will link to it if they want to go more in depth. So yeah, I think there's just a lot of ways to approach that and we're working on it.
Thank you. I know Caitlin Greeley was on the call. She just dropped off, but she's from our Rhode Island Division of Statewide Planning, and I know they have in recent years been part of a program to help prepare businesses. So some of the tips you were talking about, like don't store things in your basement, or I know I'm not sure if anyone on the call now that Caitlin has dropped off is aware of exactly where, where you can find that Rhode Island resource, but I know it exists and we will find it and share it on our follow-up resource page. So uh, if anyone is new to this to our group here, we record all our roundtables and we post them along with related resources on our the Main Street pages of our Grow Smart Rhode Island website. So we will find it and put it there for all of you. So with
Really
that,
quickly, on that note, I did want to mention that's another thing that downtown organizations are essential for. There are resources. How do you get them to the people? How do you get them to the businesses? And having that kind of order of distribution for very important resources that do exist is really important. And I think Main Street organizations, downtown organizations play a key role in that messaging and distribution of resources. Just had to say that.
thank you.
And just really, really quick, we will share this on our blog, but Silvana, if you're those of you who are not looking at the chat, Silvana just included a link to those resources for Rhode Island in the chat. So
Oh,
it's
nice.
there right now.
Oh, good. All right. Well, with that, it's 1:02. So we will draw the official roundtable to a close. But truly, thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, there is, you can see the images on the news, which we all did, but to hear the story from you is it is so much, it makes it so real, right? It makes the work that we're trying to do so much more real. So I really do appreciate it. And I think it will make a difference to Rhode Island as we're, working and working on our own climate resilience strategies. Um, so thank you everyone for attending also. It, I, as always, will stick around on the Zoom for a few extra minutes if anyone has further thoughts they want to share or if they want to connect. But uh, we want to be respectful of time, and so everyone's officially dismissed. Thank you so much for coming. We'll be in touch. Right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Katie, these are some of my other coworkers here. Scott, our director, and Toby, she's our Main Street fellow. And then you already met Evelyn and Caroline, who work on our programs, our communications, and
Katie,
Yeah, that was so awesome. Thank you.